don't know, maybe I'll sort of stem blog that. I don't know. But
sorry, can you come again on that?
What?
Sorry, I missed that. I just heard fact checking a sword stem.
I said I have a theory that if you death grip the sword throughout the entirety of a fight, and you're using a fader with the death grip, it's more likely that it's actually going to break the sword as opposed to having a more relaxed grip. It's just something I've noticed. But you can use that.
Likely.
Okay. Very good. Yeah, maybe we'll sword stem it. I don't know. Anyway. So yeah, we don't need to death grip the sword. We want a nice relaxed grip, but also one that when I have impact, it's not just bouncing back on it, right? I want to make sure that as I'm going to throw my cuts, I'm still having control of my sword so it doesn't bounce back, but also so I'm not just death grip hammering it in. I saw a video recently on Instagram, and it was a video on longsword grips, and it was literally the exact opposite of everything I'm telling you right now, which was very amusing because it was, you're going to take your thumb and index finger and squeeze on the sword in a handshake. But then these other 3 fingers, or 2 fingers, I suppose, are like not doing anything. It's all here, and then you're doing this. And I thought, man, that's going to hurt your wrists after a while. But anyway, so if you see that, I would recommend not doing your sword fighting that way, only because you will probably eventually get chronic compounding injuries in hands and wrists. Maybe. Again, fact check me. I don't know. That's just my understanding of how the body works. Now, when we're doing our handshake grip to do the Oberhau, I can start in more of a hammer grip as long as I'm choking sort of back a little bit. Again, not having my hands way out here. But as I go to throw the cut, I want to use those back 2 fingers, right, to throw that point out. Now you'll notice as I do that, the sword is engaging much sooner and keeping my hands safer. The tip starts moving very early on. The edge, the blade starts getting in. Not only that, but it starts having that nice cross guard because it's on a 90-degree angle from the hilt, right? This covers my hands as I'm pressing it out, as opposed to it's like nowhere near covering my hands as I'm throwing it out. So the crossguard can actually do its job when we're in the handshake grip for rowing that Oberhau. So now what we're going to do is look at cutting from a high vom tog with the Oberhau, and then cutting from a shoulder vom tog. If we're going to just cut from the high vom tog, now in this case, I'm not going to step yet. We're going to get into the step in a second. For now, I'm just going to stay stationary. With my high vom tog, so glad we have high ceilings. Again, I want to maintain that handshake grip. So you'll notice my sword is not straight up in the air, and it's also not like trailing back down. This is my personal preference, but there are historical sources that do show vom tog here, that do have it like straight up. There are a lot of variations. So I'm not going to say it's wrong. It's just, I find it a little bit easier when you're learning to start nice and high. Basically, it's in a position already to just drop. And that's what we look for. So again, without the step, we're going to start in a high vom tog. I'm on my right side. I'm probably nearer to you guys. So do it off of your dominant side. So in this case, it's my right. So from here, I want my arms nice and extended. Got my handshake grip. As I'm cutting down, I'm going to cut on a 45-degree angle, only because this is probably the easiest one to visualize in our minds as beginners. So as I cut down, my arms are going to stay extended. So I don't want chicken wings, right? Pulling the elbow out this way, that's bad. If you start pulling the elbow, then that means that your full left arm, your full non-dominant arm and hand are not actually doing anything to power this cut. They're actually pulling energy away from it, which is not ideal. So again, my left arm is doing this. It's staying nice and straight. My right arm is doing this. So together, I'm not bending the arms, I'm not bending the wrist. I'm doing actually very little in terms of motion in my arms. Now, when I say my arms are straight, I want to make sure that they're not locked. My elbows aren't locking or hyperextending this way, right? That would also be bad. If the joint is hyperextended and locked, it doesn't have the ability to absorb energy the same way. So again, you have like little percussive injuries that can happen, and they're small and they're compounding, but over time, you could get something like tennis elbow, for example. Again, you'd have to fact check it. I need like little footnotes for like verbal stuff. But again, not extending the elbow. I've got just a nice gentle bend as I'm cutting. But again, nicely extended. I don't want to start creating hard bends as I'm cutting, right? Okay, good. Any questions so far while I take this sweater off? It's extremely hot. Yeah. Okay. Very good. So far we have not done this with a step yet, and I'll get into the step in a second. But cutting from the shoulder. I'm gonna go this way. So I don't want to like cut really shallow like this, like T-Rex arms. This is not really gonna help you. I mean, maybe I don't see anybody really using it with any sort of efficiency or effectiveness. But some people think, okay, this is where my arms are, and to cut, I just want to do this. No, we still want to extend the arms. The rules still apply for the way that we did it from above. You're still throwing an overhau. You're just going to enter the trajectory of the cut a little bit later. So what I want to do is throw this out and then cut. Okay. So you'll notice that I'm coming out in the handshake grip and then finishing the cut. Now I'm breaking it up into two very distinct motions right now. But when we're doing this normally and at speed, it's just one smooth action, right? Boom, all the way down. Now you want to finish with a full cut. We're going to full cuts and half cuts as well soon, but you want to finish in a position called Albert or Fool or the Fool's Guard, which if you have a wider grip on the hilt, it's much harder to finish in the handshake grip, right, with a wider grip, as my left arm will start to compensate. So a lot of the time you'll see people cut down and they'll finish here. This, you can see this in like Fiore. I believe Fiore has like something very similar to this, with the back arm bent. It's not a KDF thing, sorry. But if you bring the hands a little closer together, you can finish with nice straight arms. Switching the grip between wide and narrow has advantages and disadvantages. I'm not going to get into those right now. It's not really specific to the Oberhau, but I do have a video that I think I've linked in the Discord, and I do talk about the inherent differences between those two. It's in the grips video that I did, so that might be helpful. Now, again, back to cutting the Oberhau from on top. I'm going to push out into the trajectory of the cut, as if I cut from above, right? Getting cutting into that same line and cutting down. So now with the footwork, we've talked about, I believe that we've covered passing steps and advancing steps, just generally in class often enough that I think most of you guys know what it is. If anybody is like new right now tonight, basically we're going to use the passing step for tonight, and it's just taking a step forward. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but for now, that's where we're going to go with it. If I throw the Oberhau from my dominant side, I need to step with it, right? It's not a Zornhau. Again, if you use the umbrella term, it is. But for our common Oberhau, it is not. And because it's a full cut, I want to make sure I'm not cutting into my knee leg. So right now, my non-dominant side, my left side, leg is forward. The sword is primed on the right side. This is balanced. I always want my sword, I say always, there's exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, I want my sword on the opposite side of my lead, okay? So my Vomtag is here, as opposed to here. I would then need to come over to the other side. Same with like ox, for example. The ox position, the crossed ox is here on my right side, my left foot forward, my right foot is forward, the ox is on my left. So I want to try and keep that in mind. So if I'm in my good Vomtag position, which is on my dominant shoulder, then in that case, my left foot would be forward. If I throw my Oberhau, right, I'm cutting over my leg. Now, with a longsword like this, it's really not like dangerous, so to speak. I mean, I'd have to be very special to somehow drive it into my leg. I don't really know how I would manage that. Oh, there's a human being out there. Okay. I don't know how I would manage that. But what it's doing is actually twisting up the body in such a way that it decreases the ability for me to engage the large muscle groups in my body to power my cut. So at this point, I've cut to the center line, right? Here, this is all fine and good to this point, because I can engage my hips, my core, my shoulders and hips are moving together to the center, right? Boom. But to finish that cut past the center line, I'm then cutting over myself. That's when the hip starts kind of closing in, and having the closed hips then like totally negates the core in this case. So I don't want to cut over my leg, and that's why. So I'll have to step with the cut. Boom. So now I'm cutting to my open side, right? Now in Auger, my sword is on the left side, my right foot's forward. Okay. I'll do that again. Okay. I'm not going to get too detailed about the footwork specifically. That will be a whole other class in which we'll go over the very fine mechanics of different kinds of footwork. So we won't worry about that right now. But like I said, we want to cut and step together. Now, if I'm doing a half cut, for example, I believe I described sort of in the document the difference between a full cut and a half cut. This is not historical terminology by any means. This is sort of like what I use when I'm teaching. Again, sort of like a Mordhau colloquialism to use full cuts and half cuts. But I think other clubs sort of have similar terminology, if not the same. But for the most part, the full cut is literally a full cut from one position in one quadrant to the other. And it's cutting through or past the center line. So the center line should be right down the center of my body. I'm also going to line myself up just on the grids on the floor. Maybe you can see it in the video, maybe not, I don't know, hopefully. but I'm right about center-ish, more or less. So the center line, my full cut, here's the center line. Once it comes past the center line, that's full, right? Full cut. Half cuts stop on the center line in order to get the point threatening to our opponents. This can set up thrusts really nicely as well, but a half cut cuts to the center. Boom. So it's not actually finishing all the way down to Albert in this case. It's finishing in something like long point. To here. Okay. If we're doing half cuts, you can step with them, or you could not step with them. It depends on what you're trying to set up. Now, again, there are exceptions to every rule, in which case you don't have to step. But for the Oberhau, it's really useful in order to do it, especially if you're doing full cuts, less so if you're doing half cuts. I can do a half cut over that transitions to an under, in which case I've set myself up then for that appropriate forward. Okay, very good. Any questions so far about this? You're allowed to say no. Okay, very good. All right, now, these lights are extremely hot, so I'm gonna get water really quick and take a second.
Is there no AC in there?
There is, but it's really loud.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah, and you would probably hear it instead of me. Okay.
Well, we can get you like a mic that connects to, the ping mic. I don't know what's the name of that, but you can kind of, put it on your shirt so we can hear you and you can have the AC on at the same time. That'd be nice.
That would be good, actually. Okay. Okay. I'm actually going to keep this over here. So everybody's good so far, right? Yeah? Good. Okay. Yep. So the Oberhau, like I've been saying this entire time, is really not overly complicated in terms of just motion, right? You don't have to think about like getting into a really weird grip switch or like stepping one way and cutting the other way. It is really simple. It's one of the basic cuts. It's so basic, in fact, that it's not even really included in the Hauptstücke. Hopefully I said that right. Again, I don't German, but the 5 master cuts, they each have their own section for the Hauptstücke. The Oberhau, like, it doesn't. It is so basic. It's like the most peasant-y strike that exists. But for something that's supposedly so simple, to do it really, really well, obviously, takes a little bit of knowledge. It's one thing to just grab a sword and just start swinging, right? And it looks goofy. Like if you watch YouTube videos and you see people just swinging swords or sticks, you get an idea of like, I don't know if they know what they're doing. and that's because when you start seeing good structure and good mechanics, the Oberhau is a lot more effective. So now we're going to talk about cutting the Oberhau from your non-dominant side. Pretty much all the rules are the same. Okay. When we switch to the opposite side, so if we're right-handed, in which case I am, I'm going to say right-handed. I mean dominant side. So if anybody's left-handed, do it left-handed for yourself. Gosh, it is busy out there for quarantine state. Anyway, when we switch to our non-dominant side, I do not switch hands. I get this question actually like more often than you'd think, mostly on Instagram, not from you guys. But when I switch to the opposite side, I literally just switch to the opposite side. That's it. I don't do anything fancy. I don't want to like switch hands, right? This is not a thing, except in the case of poleaxe. Poleaxe is one of the few things in KDF where you switch which dominant or which hand is dominant on the weapon. So, there's a precedent for it, just not with longsword. So, if we switch to the opposite side, to our non-dominant side, in this case my left side, right? Same deal, same rules apply. I want to make sure that I'm not, chilling out with my hands out here, just making them available to anybody who wants to hit them. I'm still tucking it back. If I'm coming from a high bum top, same thing, right? Doesn't really change. And I'm still going to cut those angles all the way down. Nice and simple. Things to keep in mind as well, the footwork. This is where people get tripped up because they get used to stepping one way for the Oberhau on the dominant side and then forget to do it on the other side. So the same rules I said apply, because if we are standing with a good bump hog or even hardcore wrap, whatever, it doesn't matter, as long as it's on the non-dominant side, my right leg or my dominant leg should be forward. So in that case, again, if I'm cutting, I'd be cutting across my leg. So I would still want to step with my cut as I would. Now that applies, of course, when we start alternating as well. So this, I like giving this drill to people only because they find one side is significantly easier than the other. And then putting it together, they're like, oh, I literally just do the exact same thing on the other side. And you're like, yeah. So we're going to do just that over, 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 over. And I'm only doing it on the spot now because I want to get the light that I've got. But again, my feet are changing with each cut. So I don't want to get caught up where boom, boom. I can't even screw it up properly. I want to make sure I'm moving with each cut. That's it. That's the bottom line. And that just prevents me from getting caught up where I'm doing stuff like this and then having to fix the position or restabilize or something, right? So there's that. Now, I'm not sure how I'm going to be able to demonstrate it. You just have to use the power of your imaginations, which I am confident are very, very strong and adequate. I can cut my Oberhau, like I said, on that 45-degree angle, right? Here. However, I can also cut it here. It's not straight down, the Scheitelhau, but it is a little bit tighter. This is much harder to defend, right? Our normal ox parry that we have here easily defends a 45-degree angle cut. So if you're doing hang and parry drills, for example, with a partner, whenever we get back to being able to have drilling partners, you want to throw the 45-degree angle cuts as beginners, or if your partner is a beginner, because the ox parry is specifically really, really good against that 45-degree angle. But it gets harder and harder to defend against if it starts getting tighter, especially if you start getting into the territory of almost Scheitelhau. You're very, very likely to start hitting people's hands as they start floating into weird positions. And same with having a little bit more of a almost horizontal Oberhau, but again, once it starts floating away from the descending and starts coming sideways, it's not really an Oberhau anymore. So you have to be a little careful if you're going to classify your cuts that way. But you can start coming out a lot more horizontally. And that's still totally fine. Now, again, with the umbrella term, I could throw true edge, false edge, and it's still an Oberhau. So just keep in mind, Oberhau is either umbrella or it just literally means our downward descending true edge cut. Okay. Questions so far, or at all, where we're at? Or are we still good?
Would be a situation where you're the half cut.
Is this Jared?
Yeah.
You're cutting in and out in your question.
Is that better?
Yeah, but you're very quiet. I'll try and listen. What's up?
What would be a situation where you would throw the half cut?
Oh,
like, where would you?
perfect. A feint, for example, would be one case where I don't commit fully, right? Boom, boom. Another example of a half cut, in terms of training, not in terms of a martial application in this case. Being able to train the half cut allows me to get tighter cuts and transition from this position, as opposed to boom and then having to cut. You enter, I would have to go all the way back.
So basically, just using it as part of your film.
Yeah. Especially because if you think about when you throw the Oberhau, and if Kyle was here or somebody else was here, I'd be able to explain that a little easier. But if I was to cut and they defended it, for example, and I end up here, it would be like throwing a half cut. I am prepared and I know what it feels like to transition to something else. However, there are martial applications to half cuts as well. In which case, for example, I could just cut and then shoot the point and cut around. Because it sets my point right on line, right? So, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Good. Good job. Anybody else? Okay. Very good. So, for those of you that are new, kind of novice in the beginner range, I highly suggest practicing the Oberhau as much as you can from both sides. And I'm thinking about doing an all Oberhau workout again. I say again as if I did it already. I just mean again as in like another workout plan similar to the ones we've been doing, but just for the Oberhau. So I'll probably end up doing that again. Really good if you're just starting because the Oberhau is something you need to learn and become very proficient at. Because I really don't think if you don't understand the Oberhau, you're gonna have a really hard time understanding everything else. So I will do that. From a more advanced perspective, in terms of the Oberhau, some of the things that you want to think of when you're doing this is being able to control the momentum of your cut. So this is not something that we really hyper focus on with beginners, only because I want beginners to be able to move their sword confidently. But when you're swinging the sword, you need to be able to control the sword. So it's not necessary for you to just swing for the fences as hard as you can. It's sort of pointless, unless you're able to terminate that energy immediately. It's one thing to be able to throw a cut with a lot of power, a lot of speed. It's another thing to be able to stop it. Only because we need to be able to react quickly in a fight and change our direction, change our momentum, or arrest our motion entirely. Not just martially, but just for safety as well. We've talked a little bit in tournaments about how, you're cutting around, and that person goes, ah, and they give you back the head. You need to be able to stop your motion and not seriously injure somebody, right? So from a safety and training perspective, it's very good to be able to control your motion, especially with an Oberhau. And then of course, that way you are able to, martially speaking, change the trajectory of your cuts and the pattern very quickly and divert energy and whatever. So in that case, one of the things that you do, if you have a PEL, this is a lot easier. If not, what I like to do is cut and stop. You'll notice people don't have this ability when they are hitting So if I'm ending up cutting my Oberhaus, and I'm like trying very hard not to hit my brand new mats, it'll be inevitable, I'm sure, when we start having students. But if you hit the floor, right, and you're not really controlling swords, and you're just hitting the floor. A good Oberhau, finishing in a proper elbow position, should not hit the floor at all. So you want to be able to cut and finish well before it like ends up driving into the ground. But a good Albert position does not have it into the ground, right? It's sort of like just past it, and then you can transition again. You're stopping well before you hit anything. Sean did his class the other night on Wednesday, and I thought it was really interesting. He did a bit of a footwork thing where he's talking about how you're like leaning and falling as you step and catching yourself. The same is true when you're throwing an Oberhau. So I think Sean had done counts for you guys to do it. Like, okay, 1, 2, 3, lulls you into a pattern, and then he changes the count, and he goes 4, and you're like, oh shit! And you catch yourself like falling because you're still like throwing your body into the motion. And this is something we want to fix, right? We want to be very in control of our bodies as we move, so that I'm not falling and I am stepping. The same with the Oberhau. And that's, I think, part of the reason, and Sean can jump in anytime, correct me, but if you can control your body that way, you can control your sword that way. So if I'm throwing a cut and it's pulling me, I'm doing something wrong, right? You see people throw cuts and they're like leaning into it, throwing their weight into it, the sword sort of like just dragging them along for the ride. There's no control there, right? That's somebody very easy to take advantage of because they're not going to be balanced. So for those of you who are more advanced students, this is something that you can definitely work on. And you start building that skill with really simple cuts like the Oberhau, because you already know how to do it mechanically, and so you can focus on those fine details as opposed to, I gotta make this complicated set of cuts work and then not fall over and make sure everything else is right. No. It's simple enough, so this is where you can end up doing and training more like specific biomechanical stuff. I know that's sort of a more complex thing. Are there any questions about that in particular, or anybody have any thoughts on it? No? Okay. Very good. I'm gonna check the time really quick, because I kind of rambled for a little while.
So 46.
Oh, thank you. Okay, very good. So we've got about 14 minutes left, which is good, because tonight is only 1 hour. Is when it's Friday. What is it? Friday. That's good. Okay, very good. So now we can talk about when we want to use the Oberhau. A lot of people, and I again, you'd have to fact check me on it, but I would say that like 90% of tournament fighters initiate with a right Oberhau or a dominant side Oberhau. Like just no matter what it is, no matter what's happening, no matter what their opponent is doing, they're always just throwing their Oberhau out. It's not necessarily wrong or bad, just noticing that that's very common. This is a really good cut to create space, right? You can use it in a cross-cutting sense, which is really popular actually in Polish saber, which is not German or KDF or long at all, but we can borrow the concept, and you can just throw cuts, and somebody's going to have to wait either to get in on the knock rising or to keep space, right? Or they're going to try and like parry it and then do something. But when you are making that action, they have to do something to react to it. So there's nothing wrong with entering with an Oberhau. Just make sure you're doing it safely, right? The previous rules we talked about, not just launching the hands out there. And then, of course, doing so safely. If you're just throwing an Oberhau for the sake of throwing an Oberhau, it's very easy. It's nice to set stuff up with, because again, in the perspective of like tournament fighting, as opposed to going totally by the book here. If most tournament fighters are entering with an Oberhau, it sets stuff up really, really well. And you'll see that a lot. It'll be like Ober to Zwerg, or they'll be like Ober, I'm trying to think what they do, Ober to Hunter, or whatever. It's a really simple cut to set up more cuts from there or other techniques. Only because, this is my theory, when people see an Oberhau coming in, more often than not, and not every time, because there's other things you can do to set it, but more often than not, you're going to need it with a static hanging parry, and you know what they're going to do. So it allows you to set stuff up much easier. Especially if you're going to use it like a feint. So if I was to feint here to set up my other cut, I would assume, again, don't ever assume, go with the flow in the fight, but for this case, we're going to assume that most people will go like this and parry with the ox, in which case, perfect, okay, so they've parried in the ox, I will cut around and do something else, maybe a descending Zwerg cow, or like, a rising Zwerg to their arms. So there's a lot of different ways to use the Oberhau as like a complementary part of a combination. And of course you can use it to set up your thrust as well. And then again, your options become much, much greater if you use Oberhau as the umbrella term and not just your basic downward descending cut. The Zornhau, which is one of the 5 master cuts, is very similar. It is still an Oberhau, is the umbrella term, in which case you cut across the center line, putting the point on line like a half cut would. Displace a little bit with it, and then you shoot the point. So if you think of that in terms of an Oberhau, very useful. Or again, you just throw an Oberhau and somebody parries, and you use a winding to put the point in. So it sets up a lot of stuff, but very, very rarely do you right off the bat just throw an Oberhau and just bonk them in the head. But I wish fighting was that easy. I really do. It doesn't happen all that often. So, yeah, so I think for the last 10-ish minutes? Yeah, 10-ish minutes. Oh. Let's have a chat. This is where I would encourage you to not sit there and watch me, because I have some questions for you guys, in which case would be, what is the hardest part about doing an Oberhau for you personally? Anybody?
For me, it's terminating it too short.
Okay.
Or like cutting the power off immediately and not following through all the way.
Yeah, okay, good. So that would be like, you mean like...
It's like I generate a ton of force, and then as soon as it hits, it's like, it stops. So that's kind of like my problem sometimes.
Okay, good. Do you think you know a solution for it?
Probably just comes from just not rotating the hips all the way.
Okay.
That's what I think.
Is this Tony? I'm going off.
Yeah. Yeah, this is Tony.
Hi, Tony.
What's up, Brittany?
Where have you been all week?
I was there on the Sunday one. I missed Wednesday.
Were you?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, very good. Good. Okay, good. Anybody else? Is there anything about an Oberhau that's difficult, or is this just like too easy for everybody?
Okay, I'll be the one to ask a dumb question. It's not my question, but probably someone else is wondering it, but hesitate to ask. So we do practice a lot of Oberhau, and we, do use the Oberhau. But what if that we find our Oberhau is not effective against our opponent, especially that they are not trying to engage with us and not getting to bind with us? And what should we do with our Oberhaus?
Hashtag asking for a friend, right? So you're asking if you're fighting an opponent who doesn't want to engage, doesn't want to get into any binds, and you're wondering like, why would you use the Oberhau?
Yeah, you can interpret it that way.
Okay, I mean, I don't want to interpret.
How do you make them react to your Oberhau?
What?
I think that's what he's asking is how do you make them react? I don't know if it's possible.
Okay, can you still see me if I'm like this?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Last one now. So to answer that, I feel like there's a few different ways I can answer that. One, I would not rely on the Oberhau and force it to work. If my opponent is doing something that doesn't allow my stuff to work, I'm not going to force it. I should never be forcing a cut to happen. And in a fight, I'm never going to be like, okay, I'm going to do this thing. And then they should do this thing. And then that means I can do this other thing and hit them. It's not going to work very often for you. That's not a good fight psychology. So the answer would be if your opponent is like not engaging you that way, don't do it, right? Instead, I would probe them with the point, for example, and threaten them, back them up into the corner. If they're not doing anything to threaten me, then I'm going to do all the things I can. If that means a flurry of cuts that aren't just Oberhaus, if that means shooting the point at them, chances are pretty good if they're not engaging, I'm just going to stab them. And then if they don't, right, we cut off. So you don't have to only use the Oberhau. But I mean, I know you know that. So I don't know if that's answering the question that you were asking.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to bring up, so everyone know, since we're talking about Oberhau.
Oh, okay, yeah, good. I mean, asking for a friend. So, but yeah, so that is actually really interesting. Is it is one of the more basic cuts. It's super versatile. It's useful in a variety of different occasions and circumstances. But of course, you don't want to be like a one-trick pony and not know how to do anything else. So it's good to learn the Oberhau. You should know how to do the Oberhau. You should have control when you do the Oberhau. But that also ties into what to do after, right? And that is a whole like other section entirely. But like I said, I want to be able to utilize it maybe as a feint to cut around, set up to shoot the point, and then do whatever I need to, right? And so being able to start with the Oberhau is a really good foundation or building block to start with. So, yeah.
What would your, I don't know, most efficient second cuts be? Like if you could think of, I don't know, first three on top of your head.
What would my first 3 second cuts be?
Well, it's just a hypothetical. Like after you throw an Oberhau, like over the course of like however many times you've thrown it, what is like your favorite 3 second moves from the Oberhau if he like hits it?
I see. I gotcha. Okay. I was a little confused there. There was a lot of like firsts and seconds, and I was like, wait, what? So there's something that it's two parts. The first part is there's like favorite, in which case like what I enjoy doing, what I find fun would be the over to a spare. But this kind of ties back into what I was just telling you, Tran. I don't plan it out. I'm not like, I'm gonna throw the over, they're gonna parry, and then I'm gonna do this thing. Right? That's where we talk about like the artificiality of drills, is that this is very good and it can build like muscle memory that's really helpful. But when it comes into a fight, I don't want to just like robot it and be like, I'm gonna do this and then I'm gonna do this. Because it's very likely that your opponent is not gonna follow those rules that you have in your head. So when I'm throwing an Oberhau, I'm treating it like it's going to hit. Right? I'm cutting it with the intention, unless I'm doing a feint. And then from there, depending on fueling, or depending on the response that my opponent has, that's where I decide what I'm going to follow up with, whether that's going to be a thrust, a cut, a slice, or I'm going to turn it into a grapple, right? So there's that's sort of a hard question to answer, because there's what I'd like to do, and then there's like what I'd like to do as a drill, or what I should be doing in a fight, which are two different things and two different skill sets as well.
Right. Sorry. So essentially, you're using it as like a box jab to pro or whatever the opponent's going to do. Yes.
I think you cut out, because I literally just heard you say, so you're using this as a monster jam. You could not have possibly said that.
No, I did not. No, like as it's as the same as a boxer would use a jab, to use it to probe for the opponent's movements, essentially. Is what you're saying, or not?
You know what? I'll be honest with you. I haven't done a lot of boxing. I don't understand a lot of psychology or a lot of the technicalities of what punches are, what they do. But so I can't really say definitively yes or no. But yeah, I'm using the Oberhau to create an opening, to create a reaction. If they do nothing, I should be hitting them. If they just like stand there and take it, I should be hitting them.
That's basically what I was saying. That's
yeah. So like I said, I'm not a boxer. I've never done boxing, but my understanding is that that would sound pretty close.
Well, theory correlates across. I mean, stuff. I think.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I've never done boxing, but I've done enough sword stuff and watched enough boxing to be like, oh yeah, this looks like that when I do that thing. This makes sense because they do that and we do that. But that's about as much as my knowledge.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. And then I highly encourage you guys, if you have not yet, I highly encourage you to read the document that I included, the All About the Oberhau. It is literally just exactly what I've done tonight. But for those of you that are looking into doing assistant instructing, or maybe you guys are starting to like get the hang of stuff and you're interested in like helping out with your students, reading that document and understanding conceptually and biomechanically how the Oberhau works will help you understand it better too, because then you're able to explain it to other people, and that will help you understand it and become a lot more comfortable with it. So I do encourage you guys to read it. I'm probably going to do more documents like that. And then, yeah, that's Oberhau's, guys. Good job.
Well, that was a great class. Thank you.
Yeah. Good job. Was the lighting okay? Is this an okay setup?
Oh yeah, it's fine.
Perfect.
Good. Alberto provided the lights for me, so because the normal lights are not quite bright enough for nighttime stuff here, but okay, very good. So Sunday morning at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, local time, we are going to be doing the crumping iron workout, which is available in the workouts channel in the docs. That'll be fun and intense. I will spend some time going over how to do the Oberhau first. So don't hesitate to jump in on that class if you're not familiar, and or if you're not super comfortable. I will go over it, and hopefully easy enough. Otherwise, that's it. That's all I got, guys. So, cool. That's it.
Excellent job, Brittany.
Thanks.
All right, thanks.
Have a good night, guys.
See ya.